Captain Darius Holt stood alone in the quiet command deck of the Tempest Edge, his eyes fixed on the shattered moon of Qualren. The fractured celestial body hovered like a frozen scream in space, broken into 100 jagged pieces, a graveyard of silence. Moments ago he'd picked up a strange signal, an old distress code no longer used by modern systems. It pulsed with desperation, buried in static and nearly lost to time. He adjusted the receiver, narrowed the scan field, and triangulated. The source to a derelict diplomatic outpost, clinging to the remains of the moon's orbit. Caution pulsed through him, but Darius had never been one to ignore a cry for help. Guiding his ship closer, he suited up and docked manually. The station's lights flickered weakly, systems barely hanging on. Inside it smelled of burnt circuits and rusting metal. Shadows flickered in broken corridors. He moved quietly, laster in hand, sweeping the halls, until he heard a faint noise, a child's cry. He followed it through a half-jammed bulkhead door, and into what had once been a reception chamber. There, under a makeshift shield of debris, he found her. She wore ceremonial robes torn at the seams, her silver skin dulled with grime and exhaustion. Her long, pale hair was tangled, her crown missing. In her arms she clutched a child no older than 6, wrapped in a thermal blanket. Darius raised his hands slowly. "I'm human," he said. "You called for help." Her violet eyes locked onto his, filled with a strange mix of terror, defiance, and pleading. Then she did something he didn't expect. She knelt. "You are not with the Unmind?" she asked, voice hoarse. He shook his head. "No, I fight them when I can." She looked at her daughter, then back at him, her hands trembling. "My name is Alira. I was princess of the Varelian Empire. My world is gone, my people scattered or taken. My guard is dead. I have nothing to offer you but myself." Darius frowned, unsure where this was going. She reached out, desperation overtaking dignity. "I'll serve you however you ask. Just protect my daughter." Darius knelt beside her, surprised by the weight of her words. Not because she begged, he'd seen proud leaders beg before, but because there was no deception in her eyes. Only a mother's raw terror. He looked at the child, sleeping fitfully, cheeks stained with tears. He didn't need to think. "I'll protect her," he said, "but not because you owe me. Because it's the right thing to do." Alira's breath caught. "You don't know what that means. If the Unmind finds us..." But Darius was already helping them to their feet. Then, "We make sure it doesn't." They barely made it back to the Tempest Edge before the station's power failed completely. As the airlock sealed behind them, Darius guided them to the medbay, ran scans on the child, and patched Alira's wounds. She sat still and quiet, watching his every move. The silence between them was heavy, filled with things neither could say yet. As they left the ruined moon behind, Darius sent out a signal to Terran Command, explaining he had 2 Varelian survivors and requesting safe harbor. The reply came quickly. "Wait. Hold position. Verification in progress." Darius cursed under his breath. Bureaucracy moved slower than death. He turned back to the princess. "We're on our own for now." Alira nodded. "That is the only way. We've survived this long." That night, if there could be such a thing in deep space, Darius watched over the sleeping child, while Alira remained in the corner, her eyes never fully closing. He wondered what she'd seen, what horrors had driven her to hide among the dead stars. But more than that, he wondered what had driven him to care. She was not human. Her people had never allied with Earth, yet something in her voice, in that raw plea for help, had cut through years of training, protocol, and indifference. It reminded him of why he joined the Peace Corps in the first place. Not to follow orders, but to protect those who had no one else. As the ship cruised through the dark, something pinned on the long-range scanner. Movement, not just debris. Not a patrol either. Darius leaned forward, eyes narrowing. A cluster of drones, black, angular, and moving in perfect formation. Unmined scouts. His blood ran cold. They had found them. He slammed a hand on the alert panel. Alira jolted awake. "They're here?" she whispered. "Just a few. But more will follow," Darius said. "We need to jump, now." Alira gripped the control rail, trying to steady herself as the ship shuddered into action. Darius began the FTL calculations, hands flying across the console. "I hope your daughter sleeps through chaos," he muttered. "She is used to it." Alira replied quietly. The ship groaned as its engines kicked to full power, the jump sequence beginning. Outside, the unmined drones turned toward them like sharks smelling blood. Darius fired thrusters and angled the ship sharply, dodging the incoming bolts of energy that lit up the void like lightning in a bottle. "Hold on," he shouted just as the stars bent and the Tempest Edge jumped to hyperspace, leaving the Eye. Broken Moon, the dead station, and the incoming swarm behind them. But Darius knew it wasn't over. The unmined did not give up. And now that Alira and her daughter were with him, they would chase him to the edge of known space. As the stars stretched endlessly in the viewport, Alira stood beside him, silent and regal once again. "Why did you help us?" she asked at last. Darius didn't look at her. "Because someone has to, and it looks like everyone else already gave up," the ship hummed quietly. Somewhere behind them the child stirred in her sleep, and ahead of them lay 1,000 uncertain paths. But Darius Holt had already chosen his. He would protect the child, not for politics, not for payment, not for power, but because it was human to care. And someone needed to remind the galaxy that humanity hadn't forgotten how to fight for what mattered. The Tempest Edge shook as it exited hyperspace, warning lights blinking across the console. But Darius Holt ignored them, eyes locked on the dark space ahead. They had escaped the unmined for now, but he knew it wouldn't last, because machines never slept and never forgot, and the princess and her daughter were a beacon to their kind. Alira stood quietly behind him, her silver hair braided back, arms crossed tightly over her chest as if trying to hold herself together, while young Naya slept in the crew quarters, unaware of the danger growing closer every hour. Darius was heading for an old mining moon deep in the Marnak Belt, a place once used by smugglers and now forgotten by most, where they could hide, repair, and plan their next move. But as they neared the dense asteroid field around the moon, the ship's sensors began to flicker, detecting movement. "I think we're not alone," Darius muttered, narrowing his eyes at the blinking dots on the screen. Alira leaned closer, her voice low. "The unmined?" He shook his head. "Two. Small to be a patrol fleet. Might be scavengers or pirates. Either way, not friendly." As the Tempest Edge drifted through the field, the engines humming at minimum power to stay hidden, a sudden transmission crackled through no voice, just static, then a sharp pulse. That repeated in a coded pattern. Darius frowned, recognizing it from his old military days. A warning signal used by Terran ships under siege. "Someone's in trouble," he said, and though Alira said nothing, her eyes met his with that now familiar understanding. He would help, even if it meant risk. Tracking the signal, they came upon a small mining vessel locked in a silent battle, with 3 sleek unmined drones, their black shells reflecting the distant light of a nearby star. Darius pushed the engines forward and armed the cannons, catching the drones by surprise. The first was vaporized with a direct hit. The second spun away, damaged, but the third turned and locked onto them, firing a rapid stream of energy blasts. The ship rocked hard as Darius swerved between chunks of rock and ice, returning fire with careful precision. "We're outgunned," he said as alarms began to wail, "but not outsmarted." He lured the last drone into a narrow asteroid tunnel, then looped back and fired just as the drone turned to follow. Its core exploded, scattering molten debris into the emptiness. With the threat gone, the damaged mining vessel docked with. Then briefly, and its only occupant, a grizzled woman named Tyla, former engineer turned rogue scavenger, climbed aboard. She was skeptical of Darius's story at first, until she saw Alira and bowed slightly in shock, recognizing the last princess of Virelia. Tyla had once served on a Virelian research team, long before the Unmind destroyed their empire, and she offered help in exchange for safety. "I know this moon," she said, pointing at a chart. "It's got an old storage bunker deep underground, shielded, hidden. We can fix your ship there, maybe stock supplies. But we'll need to move fast," Darius agreed, and they descended toward the mining moon, weaving carefully through the thick asteroid belt. The landing was rough, the surface of the moon cracked and unstable, but Tyla led them to a wide canyon that opened into a cavern hidden by dust storms and sensor interference. Inside, the bunker was intact but cold, the lights dim and systems offline. While Tyla worked to restore power, Darius walked the perimeter, checking for signs of danger, and Alira kept Naya close, telling her quiet stories from her lost home to keep her calm. Hours passed in silence until suddenly the bunker lights flickered on and a low hum filled the air power had returned. But just as Darius began to relax, a loud ping echoed from the ship's console. The long-range scanner had picked up movement. Again, this time a larger group, fast-moving and heading straight for them. "They found us," he said through clenched teeth, checking the energy reserves. "They didn't have enough power for another jump." Tyla shook her head. "We can't outrun them, not now. But maybe ... we can trap them." She explained her plan. Quickly used the unstable magnetic core of the moon itself to generate a short burst of imb energy, enough to knock out the unmined drones temporarily. It was risky, dangerous, and could backfire, but it was the only chance they had. Darius agreed, and while Tyla rerouted the bunker systems, he and Alira set up distractions, fake signal beacons, heat signatures, and decoys to mislead the drones into flying close to the core. The tension built minute by minute, and when the drones arrived, 5 this time, they scattered across the canyon, scanning and closing in. Darius stayed hidden behind a broken ore transport, fingers hovering over the manual trigger, heart pounding. As the lead drone flew over the target zone, he activated the ENP. A sharp pulse of light erupted, followed by a deafening silence. One by one, the drones dropped from the sky like dying stars, their systems fried, their dark wings folding in on themselves. But the blast shook the moon violently, and cracks spread across the cavern's ceiling. "We have to go," Darius shouted, grabbing Alira's hand as the ground trembled beneath them. Tyla had already scooped up Naya and was sprinting for the Tempest Edge. The cavern began to collapse, rocks falling like rain. They boarded just in time, and Darius fired the engines, lifting the ship as the canyon below caved in, burying the bunker and the drones forever. As the Tempest Edge soared back into space, Alira sat quietly in the medbay, her daughter asleep. Again beside her. "You risked everything for people you don't know," she said softly when Darius entered. He shrugged, wiping sweat from his brow. That's what we do. At least it's what we should do. She looked at him for a long time, and for the first time since they met, her shoulders relaxed just slightly. But neither of them knew that farther out in the dark, a silent transmission had been received by something far worse than drones. An unmanned relay beacon had picked up their trail. They were outnumbered, outgunned, but they were not finished. And as Darius looked out at the endless stars, he knew the real fight was just beginning. The Tempest Edge floated silently through a narrow corridor of deep space, hidden between two dense nebula clouds, its hull scorched and patched from the last encounter. And inside, the air felt thinner than usual, though the ship's systems still blinked green, at least on the surface. Captain Darius Holt sat hunched over the main console, checking the life support stats for the 5th time in an hour, his brow furrowed. Something wasn't right. The oxygen levels were dropping, slowly but surely, and no system alert had warned them. Behind him, Alira stood beside the stasis chamber, where her daughter, Naya, now rested after suffering a sudden fever, her small body too weak to breathe the thinning air. Darius hadn't told her yet how bad the situation was, but he knew she could sense it. She was quiet, too quiet, watching him with those sharp violet eyes that always seemed to see the truth before anyone said it aloud. "We're losing pressure," he finally said, breaking the silence. "There's no breach, no system failure. It's like the ship is bleeding air but hiding it." Alira didn't answer at first, then turned to him with a steady voice. "Could it be sabotage?" Darius froze. That word hadn't crossed his mind, but now it echoed like a cold wind. They had taken on Tyla, the scavenger engineer, during their last escape. She had proven helpful, brave even. But in this galaxy, trust was always a gamble. Just as he stood to go confront her, a soft alarm beeped from the engine bay. Manual override detected. Darius grabbed his blaster and moved fast, Alira close behind. The door to the engine room hissed open, revealing Tyla crouched over the atmospheric regulator, tools in hand, wires exposed, and something blinking red tucked into the corner of the unit. She looked up, startled, and Darius shouted, "Step away from the console." Her eyes widened. "It's not what it looks like." But Alira had already moved, yanking the device from its socket. A hiss of air escaped. Darius saw the truth in that moment. Tyla had rigged something that could have killed them all. "You were selling us out," Darius growled. "To the unmined?" Tyla shook her head, face pale. "Not them. I swear. Someone else. Mercenaries. They offered safe passage if I gave them your location. I didn't want to, but they said they'd kill my brother." Darius's grip tightened on the blaster. "So you were going to let a child suffocate?" Tyla dropped her eyes. "I didn't know it would get this bad. I was trying to stop it." Alira stepped forward. "What's done is done. The sabotage is real. The air is poisoned now." Darius hesitated, then finally lowered the weapon. "You're going to fix this, or we all die together." Under Alira's cold gaze and Darius's watchful eye, Tyla worked fast. She rewired the air filtration, bypassed a damaged regulator, and restored a partial seal. Oxygen levels began to stabilize, but not enough. "It's temporary," Tyla said, panting. "We need new parts. A regulator coil and pressure stabilizer. I know where we can find them." Darius crossed his arms. "You're still asking for trust?" "I'm trying to earn it back," she said. "There's an old Terran outpost 2 hours from here, abandoned, maybe looted, but it was used for deep space repairs. If we're lucky, the parts are still there. It was a long shot, but with air running low and Naya too sick to move." "Far," They had no choice. Darius and Tyla left Elira behind to watch the girl, and took the shuttle toward the derelict outpost, flying fast but careful through the nebula fog. When they arrived, the station looked like a tomb, dark, cold and silent. Its outer hull was cracked, its beacon long dead. They docked manually, forced the doors open, and stepped into stale, still air. Lights flickered. The corridors groaned with ancient echoes. Darius kept his blaster drawn, every step slow, listening. The parts they needed were in Engineering Bay 3, deep in the belly of the station. As they moved through the maze of hallways, something shifted in the dark. Not machines, shadows, movement, breathing. Tyla whispered, "We're not alone." Then came a screech, metal on metal, and figures lunged from the shadows. Pirates, survivors turned scavengers, twisted by deep space isolation. Their eyes were wild, and their suits patched with stolen gear. Darius fired first, the shot lighting up the hall. Tyla ducked behind a crate as 3 pirates charged, weapons raised. The firefight was brutal and fast. Darius dropped too, but the third tackled him, slamming him into the wall. They wrestled for the blaster, but Tyla kicked the pirate aside and shot him at point blank. Breathing hard, Darius nodded to her once, and they ran. They reached engineering and slammed the door shut. Inside, the parts were scattered, but still intact. "Get them and go," Darius said, covering the door. Tyla scrambled to grab the components, stuffing them into a case. More footsteps echoed outside. They were surrounded. "Back route," Tyla said, pointing to a shaft. They crawled through the narrow tunnel just ahead of the pirates, emerging near the docking bay. Darius sealed the doors behind them and launched the shuttle as gunfire pinged off the hull. They raced back to the Tempest edge, wounded but alive. Elira met them at the bay, face pale but calm. "Naya's breathing easier," she said, "but we need clean air soon." They rushed to install the parts. Tyla worked quickly, sweat pouring down her face. As the new regulator came online, the hiss of oxygen filled the ship, cool and clean. They all exhaled in relief. Darius leaned against a wall, heart pounding. He looked at Tyla. "You're not forgiven, but you did what you had to." She nodded. "So did you." Elira came to stand beside him, her daughter now resting easier. "You keep saving us," she said quietly, "even when the odds say you shouldn't." Darius looked at her, tired but steady. "That's what honor means, doing the right thing even when it's hard." Outside, the stars burned silently, and somewhere in the dark, the unmined watched and waited. But for now, the air was clean, the ship was whole, and the fight for survival would continue. Naya's breathing had returned to normal, but Elira remained at her side, brushing strands of silver-blonde hair from her daughter's forehead, her eyes distant and full of worry as the Tempest edge sailed quietly through the void, deeper into uncharted space, far from the paths of patrols or pirates or trade routes, and even farther from the safety they desperately needed. Darius stood in the control bay, eyes on the endless stars, scanning every blip and signal for danger, knowing that peace never lasted long and the unmined was never far behind. While Tyla worked in the engineering bay alone, trying to earn back the trust she had broken. With every wire she reconnected and every fault she repaired. The ship was whole again, but the people inside it were still fractured, and the silence between them said more than any words could, until one moment shattered it all. Naya woke in a panic, screaming from a dream, her voice shaking the walls. And Elira held her tight, whispering in her native tongue, while Darius rushed in to help, heart pounding, expecting a physical threat, only to find a child shaking, pointing toward the stars, her voice a whisper now. They're coming. I saw them. And though Illyra tried to calm her, the fear in Naya's eyes struck something deep in Darius. He took a breath and walked back to the console, checking long-range scans. And that's when he saw it, an energy signature just at the edge of sensor range, faint but growing, steady and unnatural. It was them, the Unmind. They're tracking us, he said, his voice low. They're not guessing anymore. They know where we are. Illyra stood in the doorway, her arms around Naya. Then we can't run forever, she said. We need to make a choice. Darius nodded slowly. There's a place. A Terran command relay station buried in a dead moon, abandoned during the last war. It's silent, but it has the signal strength to call for help if we can reach it. If we call Earth now, if someone answers, we might get support, a fleet, anything. Tyla, listening from the hallway, stepped forward. If we light that beacon, they'll see it too. Not just the Terrans. The Unmind will know. Darius looked at her. They already do. So they plotted a course to the dead moon, the journey quiet, the tension rising with every hour, and Illyra watched Darius more closely than ever, seeing the weight in his shoulders and the fire behind his calm eyes. She knew that something had changed in him, that this wasn't just about duty anymore. That night, while Naya slept again, she found Darius on the bridge. Why do you care so much? She asked. We're not even of your kind. Darius didn't look away from the stars. Because you asked me to protect her, because she's innocent, and because I've seen what happens when we turn away from people who need us. Illyra stepped closer. And if saving her means losing you? He finally turned to her, his voice steady. Then I hope it was worth it. The silence that followed was long, but not empty. When they reached the dead moon, the station was hidden beneath layers of dust and ice, its surface cracked, but still standing, a relic of war and old promises. Darius, Tyla, and Illyra suited up and descended, leaving Naya in the medbay with the shuttle systems locked on emergency override, just in case. Inside, the station was dark and cold, air stale, lights dead, but the beacon core was still intact. Deep below the main hall, and Tyla moved quickly, fingers working wires, trying to bring it online before the Unmind arrived. Outside, the sky rippled. A single pulse of energy blinked across the darkness, and Darius's stomach dropped. They were coming fast now, no longer silent, no longer hiding. Illyra placed a hand on the beacon's panel, her voice trembling slightly. If we call Earth, they'll have to answer, won't they? Darius met her eyes. They'll try. The beacon blinked to life, humming softly, a light piercing the shadows, sending a call across light years of space. But just as it started, alarms rang out. The station had been found. A drone entered from above, then another, slicing through metal with hot blue light. Darius fired, taking one down, but more were coming. Tyla, finish it, he shouted. Sparks flew. Tyla screamed as a console exploded, and Illyra pulled her aside, shielding her as Darius covered them both, shouting for the system to hold. The beacon flared bright. Signal sent. Then everything went black. Minutes passed. Hours, maybe. When Darius opened his eyes, he was on the shuttle, head aching, Illyra sitting beside him, bruised and bloodied, but alive. Did it work? He asked. She nodded slowly. The signal went through. Now we wait. He looked past her, heart freezing. Where's Naya? Illyra's face fell. She wasn't here when we got back. Panic hit him like a wave. Systems offline. Doors breached. The only clue, a trail of small footprints in the dust outside the shuttle bay, leading into the darkness, toward the unknown. The daughter was gone. The call had been made. And now the decision would have to be more than words. It would have to be action. The moment Darius realized Naya was missing, a cold weight settled in his chest, heavier than any wound he'd ever taken, and without hesitation he grabbed his weapon, pulled a backup oxygen canister from the wall, and stepped into the moon's dim shadows, following the small, clear trail of footprints left in the dust, while Elira moved beside him, silent and focused, her breath tight with fear but her steps steady, because a mother in fear becomes a hunter, and her daughter was somewhere out there, alone and, likely, afraid, though they both knew Naya wouldn't have wandered off without a reason. Someone had taken her, and judging by the fresh drag marks near the ridge, it hadn't been an accident. Tyler remained at the shuttle, working to re-establish contact with Earth, the beacon still faintly pulsing behind her. But the real battle was out there in the darkness, where the unmind's presence now pressed closer like a fog creeping in. And Darius led them down a slope of broken rock into an old underground mining shaft that had once been sealed but now stood open, likely disturbed by drone activity or worse. And as they stepped inside, the walls whispered with old echoes, and new danger, the light from Darius's rifle cutting a narrow path through the gloom. "She's alive," Elira said under her breath, as if speaking it would make it true, and Darius nodded, because there was no other choice. They couldn't fail. Not now. Minutes passed, then strange humming echoed from below. Not mechanical, not natural, more like a song sung by something without a mouth, and they descended deeper, following a faint warmth in the air, until they saw it one of the unminds. Cedar drones, floating above the cavern floor like a black, breathing orb, and beneath it, Naya stood unharmed, eyes open wide, not afraid but entranced, and Darius held up a hand, stopping Elira from rushing forward too fast. "It's not hurting her," he whispered, "but it's trying to connect." Elira's voice trembled. "Why her?" Darius narrowed his eyes. "Because she's not just your daughter. She's something more." And the realization struck him all at once. Naya, half human, half Illyrian, carried something in her blood that the unmind couldn't understand, something it feared or needed, and now it was testing her, reaching out not to kill, but to learn. Darius slowly stepped forward, weapon low, calling softly to her. "Naya, it's me. Captain Darius, you remember me, don't you?" She blinked and looked at him, and her lips trembled. "It's whispering to me," she said. "It doesn't want to fight. It wants to be like us." The words chilled him deeper than any weapon could. Elira's face turned pale. "It's learning from her." But before they could act, the drone noticed them, its body pulsing red, and the room shifted as walls lit up with thin, black cables that slithered toward them. Darius grabbed Naya, pulling her back just as the cables struck, missing them by inches, and they ran, sprinting up the shaft, the tunnel collapsing behind them, the unminds while trying to trap them inside. "Tyler, we've got her," Darius shouted into his com. "Start the engines now." The moment they emerged into the open, dust flying in their wake, the shuttle roared to life, and Tyler opened the hatch just as they dove inside. The unmind's drone bursting from the tunnel behind them, but catching only empty air as the hatch sealed and the ship lifted off. "Is she okay?" Tyler cried, and Elira wrapped Naya in her arms, nodding quickly. "Yes, she's safe." But Darius wasn't sure. Naya's eyes still held that faraway look, like a message had been left behind in her mind, a seed of something unfinished. "What did it say to you?" he asked gently, kneeling beside her. Naya looked up. "It, SAID, Earth is the last line. If Earth falls, everything else falls with it." Darius looked to Tyler. "Did the signal go through?" She nodded. "We got a reply. A patrol fleet." But it's just 6 ships, and they're a day out. They won't make it in time. Darius stood. Then we hold the line until they arrive. The Tempest Edge soared back into space, leaving the dead moon behind, but the unmined followed like a swarm of ghosts. Ships blinking into existence on the edge of radar, dozens of them, maybe more, not fast, but steady, like a rising tide. They had one chance. Darius set a course for an asteroid field nearby, a dense belt of spinning rock and debris that would give them cover and maybe, just maybe, an advantage. Inside the belt, they powered down all non-essential systems, hiding in the shadows, watching the enemy approach. "We can't fight them all," Tyler said, hands shaking. "But maybe we don't have to," Darius replied. "We just have to survive. Make them think we're stronger than we are. Make them hesitate." They spent hours preparing traps, mines, flares, false signals, and when the first scout ship entered the field, it triggered an explosion that lit up the rocks, sending chunks of asteroid into its hull, and for a brief moment the unmined paused. That moment was everything. Darius launched a decoy signal, making it seem like a fleet was arriving early, and the unmined, cautious and always calculating, split its forces, half turning back, half advancing slowly. "That bought us maybe 6 hours," he said grimly. Alira placed a hand on his arm. "Then let's make them count." As the next wave moved in, Darius and Tyler used the Edge's guns to fire from behind asteroid cover, striking from angles the enemy couldn't trace. And Alira, sitting beside Naya, whispered old Ellerin words, stories of stars and light, calming her daughter even as battle raged outside. But it wasn't enough. The unmined adapted. Their drones shifted patterns, found the ship's heat signature, and began closing in. "We're losing ground," Tyler shouted. "One more hit and we're gone." Darius gritted his teeth. "Then we use the core." Tyler's eyes widened. "The fusion core, that'll kill us too." He turned to her. "Unless we're lucky." He set the core to overload, not to destroy, but to burst in a blinding energy flash, one that would mimic a supernova, bright enough to fry sensors and blind the unmined. They braced as the countdown began. 10 seconds, Tyler whispered. Alira held Naya tight. "You said you'd protect her," she said to Darius. He looked back at her and nodded once. "I still will." The core erupted, white light exploded across the stars, and for a moment, everything went silent. When vision returned, the unmined was gone, scattered, fleeing the sudden starburst. And then the radar beeped 6 ships arriving, Terran flags on their hulls. Earth had answered. And for now the line held. The fleet's arrival brought hope, but not peace. And as the Tempest Edge docked with the lead Terran cruiser, Darius stood quietly at the edge of the hangar, watching the movement of soldiers, engineers and officers, all preparing for something they didn't fully understand, because Earth hadn't faced the unmined directly before. Not like this, not as a thinking, learning swarm that had already adapted to traps and tricks, and while reinforcements now stood between them and destruction, everyone on board knew it was only a matter of time before the enemy returned stronger, smarter, and more determined. And so they gathered at a place called Nexus Forge, a deep space construction yard once built to manufacture warships during the last galactic war, now repurposed into a last line of defense, a fortress of broken hulls and half-finished machines, shielded by magnetic rings and scattered debris. And Darius, now promoted to mission commander, was ordered to hold the forge at all costs, because if Nexus fell, Earth would be next. The forge buzzed with activity, drones welding metal, engineers laying mines, cannons being mounted to old cargo towers, while behind it all, Alira stayed by Naya's side in the medical bay, watching her daughter sleep uneasily, her mind still affected by the brief connection with the unmind. And when Darius visited them, his voice calm but his eyes tense, he asked only one question: "Can she hear them still?" And Elira nodded slowly, saying she hears everything. Dreams of stars folding, of voices without mouths. And sometimes she repeats things they haven't said yet, which chilled Darius more than he let on, because if the unmind had left something in Naya, then the real battle might be inside her. As days passed, and scans stretched far, the forge waited in silence, until finally the alarms sounded. The swarm had returned, bigger than before, stretching across the void like a black net. Thousands of ships, drones, and carriers, moving as one, a living machine, with one will, and it was coming fast. "We hold this place," Darius ordered over the comms, "no matter what." And the Terran captains echoed the call, activating shield grids and battle lines, forming layers of defense across the forge, while the Tempest Edge, now retrofitted with heavier guns, hovered at the front like a stubborn wolf, refusing to back down. When the first wave hit, the sky lit up with fire, missiles and plasma burning against shields, and the forge shook under the assault. But it held, and Darius led from the front, piloting the Edge through debris fields to intercept enemy clusters, blasting drones apart while Tyla worked the cannons with deadly precision, and Elira, watching from a secure room with Naya, could only hold her breath as the walls trembled with every hit. Hours passed, and though wave after wave came, the forge refused to fall. But then, without warning, the unmind changed its pattern. A massive carrier moved to the rear, opening like a flower, and inside, something new emerged, a construct shaped like a humanoid form, glowing blue veins across black armor, and it moved alone, fast, cutting through Terran cruisers like paper, its weapons slicing through shields with ease. "It's a mimic," Darius said grimly, watching the feed. "It learned from us. It's becoming us." That's when Naya screamed in her sleep, thrashing against the bed, and Elira ran to her, holding her tight, whispering, "What do you see?" And the girl gasped out the words, "It's not trying to win. It's trying to speak through me." At that moment, the mimic stopped moving and turned directly toward the forge, its head tilting, and a voice echoed through every comm, every screen, not mechanical, but smooth, almost human. "Return her. The bridge must remain whole. She is not yours." And though everyone heard it, only Naya understood it fully, whispering through tears, "It wants to make her part of itself. Forever." Darius made his choice in that second. "We end this here," he said. "We take the fight to it before it gets to her." And despite every objection, he and Tyla launched in the Tempest Edge, heading directly toward the mimic, while the rest of the fleet cleared a path. The forge's guns opened wide, firing everything they had, covering the Edge as it broke through enemy lines, dodging blasts and drone interceptors, closing the distance with every second, until finally they reached the mimic. It moved fast, too fast, and struck the ship's wing, sending them spinning, but Darius regained control, leveled out, and did the only thing left. He crashed the ship directly into the mimic's carrier. Metal tore, flames burst, and as the hull shattered, Darius and Tyla climbed from the wreckage, wounded but alive deep inside the heart of the unmind's control node. The walls pulsed with strange energy, alive and humming, and in the center was the mimic, watching them silently. "You learned from us," Darius said, limping forward, "but you'll never be us." The mimic tilted its head. "You fight for the broken. We seek unity." "She's not yours," Tyla spat, raising her weapon. The mimic paused. "She is the bridge. Without her, we are blind." Darius threw a small device, a pulse bomb, and as it exploded, it knocked the mimic back just long enough for him to rush forward, slam a control spike into its core, and trigger a massive energy surge, feeding feedback through the entire swarm. All across the stars, the unmanned drones flickered, paused, and began to fall, losing direction, crashing into ships and rocks, unable to function without their central will. At the forge, the sudden silence was deafening. The enemy had stopped. The mimic, dying, looked at Darius and said one last thing. "We only wanted to understand, not destroy." Then it collapsed, lifeless. Back at the forge, Illyra felt the shift, saw Naya open her eyes slowly, breathing deep like a fog had lifted. When Darius returned hours later, bruised and limping, he found them both standing at the viewing window, watching the stars, and Illyra turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Is it over?" she asked. He looked out at the silent void, broken ships, and distant stars. "For now," he said. And in that silence, Earth lived.